Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? Let us turn our gaze now toward the sacred Tiber, the river that whispers the deep secrets of destiny, tracing the genesis of that eternal city which the gods themselves intended as the mistress of the world. Built not merely of stone, but of unrelenting will and the stern decree of fatum. Long before the wolf suckled mortal babes, this land was marked by the great prophecy given to Aeneas, the weary Trojan prince, whose tragic flight from burning Ilium was merely the arduous first step toward the establishment of an empire which would never see its like again upon the earth. He bore upon his shoulder the sacred relics of his fallen city and the heavy weight of his aged father, carrying the seeds of civilization across the wine-dark sea to find a rugged haven in the rough terrain of Latium, fulfilling the severe commands laid upon him by the Olympian Council. Aeneas, guided by the very hand of Venus, his divine mother, strove tirelessly against the local chieftains and the jealous rage of Juno, fighting bitter wars to secure the promised settlement upon the Italian shore, bringing the ancient Trojan spirit into fusion with the rustic vigor of the local tribes. His marriage to Lavinia, daughter of King Latinus, sealed this sacred covenant between the newcomer and the indigenous people, forging a foundational unity from which a greater power would inevitably spring forth, ensuring that the legacy of Troy did not perish entirely beneath the conquering Greek heel. Yet this great hero did not himself live to witness the full flowering of the destiny he planted. His immediate successors inherited only the burden of nurturing that tender seed within the soil of Alba Longa, the mother city built high upon the Alban hills, which served as the true cradle of the Latin race for many centuries. For 300 years and more, the line of Aeneas held sway in this quiet, sturdy city, a dynasty of kings whose names are now but echoes in the dust, yet whose patient governance kept the flame of destiny alive through long ages of provincial obscurity, waiting for the appointed hour of their glorious revelation. These kings maintained the primitive altars and upheld the austere laws bequeathed by their heroic ancestor, ensuring the religious and political framework remained sound until the fates deemed it appropriate for the lineage to descend once more into the realm of human conflict and dramatic event. It was the unfortunate succession of the rightful king Numitor, deposed by the ambition of his younger cruel brother Amulius, which finally brought the high drama of the divine plan back into the immediate sight of men, signaling the necessity for a powerful intervention from the heavens. The tyrant, enraged by this clear sign of celestial interference, ordered the immediate drowning of the twin infants in the swollen waters of the Tiber River, hoping to wash away the ominous threat to his precarious authority through a simple act of cold infanticide. But the basket containing Romulus and Remus was gently borne by the retreating current to the base of the sacred Palatine Hill, where the providence of the high gods ensured their survival through the unlikely intervention of the natural world. A she-wolf, a creature of fierce protectiveness and primal strength, discovered the exposed infants and provided them sustenance, offering her wild milk to nourish the future founders of a stern military republic, teaching them their first lessons in survival and savage resilience. Discovered eventually by the shepherd Faustulus and his wife Acca Larentia, the boys were raised in the rugged simplicity of pastoral life, growing strong and vigorous amongst the rough, hardy people who tended their flocks on the various hills, entirely unaware of their divine parentage or their rightful royal heritage. They excelled in feats of strength and cunning, becoming natural leaders among the shepherds, displaying that intrinsic nobility and masterful authority which fate had woven into the very fabric of their being, soon finding themselves in conflict with the neighboring brigands who preyed upon the honest labor of the fields. Through a series of bold, impulsive actions and escalating skirmishes, the brothers uncovered the secret of their birth and the grave injustice committed against their grandfather, Numitor, fueling their righteous anger and channeling their immense power toward the cause of justice. They mobilized their loyal band of shepherds and swiftly descended upon Alba Longa, executing the usurper Amulius and restoring the venerable Numitor to his ancestral throne, thereby demonstrating their innate capacity for revolution and the establishment of legitimate order, though they possessed no ambition to remain in the elder city. The twins understood that their destiny lay not in inheriting the past, but in founding a completely new city, a blank slate where they might impose a new and enduring order guided by the immense power they felt stirring within their veins. They chose the site where they had been miraculously preserved, desiring to build their eternal monument upon the rugged hills overlooking the Tiber, thereby securing a strong, defensible position and access to the vital riverine trade routes that crisscrossed the Italian peninsula. Yet, where the will of the gods is concerned, even brothers who share divine blood cannot always agree upon the precise method or the ultimate authority, and a bitter dispute arose concerning which hill should serve as the primary seat of power and which brother should hold the supreme authority to name the burgeoning city. Romulus favored the Palatine, the hill of their miraculous sustenance, while Remus argued passionately for the Aventine, suggesting that the gods might favor the slightly more secluded and steeper terrain, thus leading to the grave and fateful necessity of relying upon the divine science of augury. They agreed to watch the skies for an unequivocal sign from Jupiter, trusting that the flight of sacred birds would designate the chosen king and definitively settle the crucial jurisdictional disagreement between the ambitious siblings. Remus was the first to receive an omen, sighting 6 vultures wheeling majestically over the Aventine Hill, a clear indication that the gods had taken notice of their petition and were prepared to grant their approval to the founding, filling the young man with immediate and powerful confidence. However, the patient Romulus soon saw a far greater portent: 12 vultures soaring over the Palatine, leading to an immediate and catastrophic disagreement. For the quality of the omen, 12 birds, outweighed the swiftness of the omen, 6 birds, causing the brothers to argue bitterly over whether priority or numerical superiority ought to dictate the final decision. This tragic quarrel escalated rapidly, fueled by arrogance and the heady scent of absolute power, leading to the construction of the sacred boundary wall, the pomerium, which symbolized the separation between the profane and the eternally sacred space. Thus, Rome was founded upon the Palatine Hill in the year that ancient scholars calculate to be 753 years before the sacred era of Christ, a city born in blood and dedicated to the uncompromising ideals of discipline and stern legality, rising immediately as a place separate from all that had come before it. Romulus, now the sole master and founder, proceeded immediately to establish the initial political structures, defining the sacred rights and duties of the nascent citizenry, and laying the essential groundwork for the vast legal edifice that would one day govern the known world. He established the Senate, a council of 100 elder fathers, the patres, drawing their wisdom from the most respected heads of the leading families, thereby creating a crucial advisory and aristocratic check upon the absolute power of the king. He established the Senate, a council of 100 elder fathers, the patres, drawing their wisdom from the most respected heads of the leading families, thereby creating a crucial advisory and aristocratic check upon the absolute power of the king. The early city, however, suffered from a profound lack of female inhabitants, making its long-term survival critically dependent upon securing wives for the vast population of young, vigorous men, many of whom were wanderers, outlaws, and refugees attracted by Romulus's promise of sanctuary and opportunity. Faced with repeated, scornful refusals from the neighboring tribes to intermarry with this rough new populace, Romulus devised a strategic, ruthless plan, concealing his true intentions beneath the guise of a grand religious festival dedicated to Neptune Equester, inviting all the neighboring Sabine tribes to attend. When the festivities reached their crescendo and the visiting families were distracted by the spectacle and the wine, the Roman youths executed their concerted plan, seizing the young Sabine women and violently carrying them away within the secured boundaries of the nascent city. This terrible act, known forever as the rape of the Sabian women, ignited an immediate and ferocious war with the outraged tribes, who marshaled their forces under the leadership of Titus Tatius and besieged the Palatine stronghold, demanding the immediate return of their daughters and sisters. The ensuing conflict reached a pivotal moment upon the Capitoline Hill when the treacherous young woman Tarpeia, seduced by the promise of gold bracelets, betrayed the vital citadel to the advancing Sabians, only to be crushed beneath the heavy shields of the very warriors she sought to appease, serving as a grim warning against avarice and betrayal. The final battle was ultimately halted not by military prowess, but by the courageous intervention of the Sabian women themselves, who had by then begun to develop affections for their Roman captors and refused to allow their fathers and husbands to slaughter one another, stepping bravely between the drawn swords. The profound emotional plea of these women brought an end to the brutal fighting and resulted in the miraculous political synthesis of the two peoples. The Romans and the Sabines merged into a single unified state, agreeing to share both the monarchy and the city's jurisdiction under the joint rule of Romulus and Titus Tatius. This foundational peace, bought at such a high price of audacity and subsequent reconciliation, established a precedent for Roman expansion, incorporating the defeated rather than merely destroying them, thus multiplying the strength and manpower of the city with every successful engagement. After the swift demise of Titus Tatius, Romulus reigned alone once more, perfecting the city's military organization and legal codes, ruling with the unshakable authority that sprang from his divine lineage and his singular vision for the destiny of Rome. The reign of Romulus ended in mystery and profound celestial drama, vanishing entirely in a sudden tempest while reviewing his assembled troops upon the field of Mars, leading many to conclude immediately that the founder had not died a mortal death but had been elevated to the heavens by his divine father. Proculus Julius, a man of high standing and great virtue, solemnly swore that Romulus had appeared to him in a vision, commanding that the Romans should worship him henceforth as the god Quirinus, assuring them that their city was destined for eternal supremacy, provided they consistently cultivated the necessary arts of war and discipline. Thus, the first king became the patron god of the Roman people, solidifying the idea that the city's authority was intrinsically bound up with the divine favor of the Olympian Council, setting the stage for the succeeding 6 kings, who would gradually refine the spiritual and physical architecture of the emerging state. The second king, Numa Pompilius, a wise and deeply pious Sabine, chosen not for his martial skill but for his profound reverence and calm judgment, focused entirely upon establishing the sacred religious customs and the essential moral framework required to sustain a great power. He understood profoundly that force alone could not guarantee perpetuity, and that the savage energies released by the founding required channeling through structured ritual and profound obedience to the gods, thus giving the rough soldiery a spiritual anchor and a defined calendar of duties. Numa consulted frequently with the nymph Egeria in her sacred grove outside the walls, deriving from her wisdom the precise instructions for the proper conduct of the state's relationship with the divine, establishing the intricate priestly colleges, the sacred calendar, and the Vestal Virgins, cementing Rome's reputation for pietas, dutiful reverence. Ancus Marcius, the fourth king, was the grandson of the great Numa Pompilius, and thus inherited the peaceful wisdom of his ancestor, yet he was also forced by surrounding necessities to exercise the martial capabilities honed by Tullus, skillfully balancing religious observance with necessary military expansion. He significantly extended the borders of Rome, establishing the vital port city of Ostia at the mouth of the Tiber, thereby securing Rome's access to the sea and fostering the early seeds of maritime trade and defensive naval capacity, connecting the landlocked power to the wider Mediterranean world. Uncas also oversaw the construction of the first permanent wooden bridge across the Tiber, the Pons Sublicius, which greatly facilitated communication and transport, transforming the city from a collection of defensive hills into a unified, functioning commercial and military hub. The final three kings were of Etruscan lineage, representing a period of immense foreign cultural influence and significant urbanization, transforming Rome from a humble collection of villages into a genuine city of sophisticated stone structures and advanced infrastructure. Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king, was a wealthy and ambitious Etruscan immigrant who achieved power through astute maneuvering and the clear favor of the gods, exemplified by the potent omen of the eagle, which snatched his hat and then meticulously replaced it upon his head as he approached the city walls. Tarquin greatly expanded the Senate, initiated major public works projects, including the construction of the Circus Maximus for grand spectacles, and the beginnings of the Great Sewer System, the Cloaca Maxima, demonstrating a dedication to public utility and grandeur. Servius Tullius, the sixth king, rose to power through a dramatic and controversial succession following the assassination of Tarquin Priscus, relying heavily upon the support of the late king's powerful wife, Tanaquil, and claiming divine mandate from the mysterious spectacle of his head surrounded by silent flickering flames while he slept as a child. Servius Tullius is remembered chiefly as the great constitutional reformer, credited with reorganizing the entire Roman populace into specific tribes and classes based on wealth and property ownership, rather than merely by birthright, thereby instituting the principle of proportional civic duty and military obligation. This census system, known as the Servian Constitution, linked political power and military standing directly to one's ability to furnish arms and serve the state, fundamentally shifting the balance of power and broadening the base of political participation beneath the autocratic veneer of the monarchy. He also significantly expanded the sacred Pomerium to encompass all 7 hills of Rome, marking the true physical maturation of the urban territory and defining the protective jurisdiction of the city gods over the entire community, surrounding the new, vast boundary with a magnificent stone wall known thereafter by his name. Servius Tullius sought diligently to balance the power of the aristocracy with the needs of the common people, preparing the ground for the Republic by introducing proto-democratic concepts and ensuring that even the humblest citizen had a defined place within the state structure, though his attempts at moderation ultimately led to his tragic downfall. His righteous reign was violently cut short by a brutal conspiracy orchestrated by his own ambitious and profoundly wicked daughter, Tullia, and her husband, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, who yearned for absolute, unconstrained power and scorned the measured reforms of the moderate monarch. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, known forever as Tarquin the Proud, seized the throne through parricide and usurpation, ruling the city not by legitimate election or divine mandate, but by sheer force and tyrannical terror, discarding the consultative nature of his predecessors and entirely ignoring the Senate and the will of the people. He abolished all the moderate reforms instituted by Servius Tullius, executing rivals, confiscating properties, and ruling with an iron fist, Yet, paradoxically, it was under his tyrannical reign that many of Rome's most lasting and magnificent public works were completed, including the magnificent Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus upon the Capitoline Hill. His oppressive rule, however, fostered a growing, profound resentment among both the aristocratic and the common populace, who yearned for the return of lawful governance and the sacred traditions of their ancestors, creating a volatile atmosphere ready to ignite with the slightest provocation. The final, fatal spark that irrevocably shattered the monarchical age was not a political maneuver or a military defeat, but a terrible, shameful transgression against the sacred honor of a noble Roman matron, Lucretia, committed by Sextus Tarquinius, the king's arrogant and dissolute son. Driven by lust and the sense of impunity conferred by his royal status, Sextus violated Lucretia's chastity in a profound act of moral and spiritual desecration, shattering the core value of pudicitia, Roman feminine virtue, which upheld the ethical framework of the entire society. Lucretia, though pure in heart and having resisted the outrage with all her strength, felt that her survival would bring irreparable shame upon her family and her people, summoning her father and her husband, Collatinus, along with their noble friend Lucius Junius Brutus, to bear solemn witness to her final, tragic declaration. Tarquin the Proud, absent from the city and attempting to lay siege to the town of Ardea, found himself instantly deserted by his own army and utterly repudiated by the Senate and the entire Roman people, who had finally found the collective will to cast off the oppressive yoke of 7 generations of kings. The gates of Rome were shut fast against the exiled tyrant, and the Senate formally abolished the institution of the monarchy forever, thereby establishing the res publica, the public affair or commonwealth, a government dedicated ostensibly to the interests of the people and founded upon the solemn promise of liberty and structured shared governance. Thus, in the year 509 BC, the Roman Republic was born, dedicated to preventing the consolidation of power in any single hand, replacing the single king with 2 annually elected magistrates, the consuls, who would share the supreme executive authority, imperium, and provide a vital constitutional check against individual ambition. Thus, in the year 509 BC, the Roman Republic was born, dedicated to preventing the consolidation of power in any single hand, replacing the single king with 2 annually elected magistrates, the consuls, who would share the supreme executive authority, imperium, and provide a vital constitutional check against individual ambition. The very first consuls appointed to lead the fledgling republic were Lucius Junius Brutus, the revolutionary founder, and Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, Lucretia's grieving husband, signaling the immediate determination of the new state to honor the oaths sworn over the bloody body of the martyred matron. However, the shadow of the exiled Tarquins loomed large, and it was soon deemed necessary to compel Collatinus, bearing the name of the hated former dynasty, to resign his office and depart the city, illustrating the Republic's ruthless commitment to prioritizing collective security and political symbolism over personal allegiance or even foundational heroism. The early republic was therefore immediately marked by a stern, uncompromising realism, recognizing that even the most well-intentioned individuals might pose a threat if their existence undermined the fundamental principle of anti-monarchical liberty. The exiled Tarquins did not yield quietly, securing the military support of powerful neighboring Etruscan cities, most notably Veii and later Clusium, leading to a decade of relentless struggle for the very survival of the nascent republic, forcing Rome to fight numerous desperate battles in defense of its revolutionary ideals. The most formidable challenge came from Lars Porsena, the mighty king of Clusium, whose armies marched directly upon Rome and achieved a near-total breach of the city's defenses, forcing the Romans to resort to legendary acts of desperate courage and individual sacrifice to halt the overwhelming Etruscan advance. It was during this siege that the heroic figure of Horatius Cocles emerged, defending the narrow timber bridge single-handedly against the entire Clusian army while his comrades desperately hacked away the supports behind him, ensuring the city's continued physical survival through his unparalleled bravery. Following the almost superhuman efforts of Cocles, the young noble Gaius Mucius Scaevola infiltrated the Etruscan camp with the intent of assassinating King Porsena, but mistook the king's secretary for the ruler himself, thereby failing in his patriotic mission and being immediately captured by the guard. When interrogated, Mucius demonstrated his unwavering resolve by thrusting his own right hand into a blazing sacrificial fire, holding it there until it was utterly consumed without uttering a single cry of pain, informing Porsena that 300 similarly resolute young Romans stood ready to attempt the same deed. Stunned by this incredible display of Roman fortitude and defiant contempt for pain, Porsena, fearing the relentless determination of such a people, abandoned his siege and sought peace with the city, recognizing that a spirit so fierce could not be subdued by ordinary military force. While facing these external existential threats, the young republic was simultaneously tearing itself apart through internal strife, as the long-simmering tensions between the aristocratic patricians, the ruling class descended from the original senators, and the plebeians, the common free citizens, finally erupted into open conflict over debt and political rights. The patricians, enjoying a monopoly on religious offices, magistracies, and the enforcement of the law, often leveraged this power cruelly against the plebeians, especially concerning ruinous debt, which frequently led to the physical enslavement of free citizens, rendering the promise of liberty a hollow mockery for the common man. The struggle for equality, known as the conflict of the orders, became the defining internal dynamic of the early republic, dictating the course of political evolution and compelling the reluctant patriciate toward necessary, grudging concession. The plebeians possessed the ultimate weapon in this political struggle, the power of secession, the refusal to serve in the Roman legions during times of war, and the physical withdrawal of the entire populace to the Sacred Mount outside the city boundaries, thus paralyzing the military and economic function of the state. The First Great Secession in 494 BC forced the patricians to acknowledge the inherent rights of the common people, leading to the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs, two sacred and inviolable magistrates whose bodies were protected by religious oath, granting them the ultimate power of veto, intercessio, over any governmental action that harmed a plebeian citizen. This revolutionary creation of an inviolable office within the state structure, dedicated solely to the defense of the common man, marked the first true movement toward a more inclusive form of republican governance, and provided the plebeians with a crucial voice in the halls of power. The tribunate, backed by the implicit threat of further secessions, slowly but steadily chipped away at the patrician monopoly. But the common people recognized that true equality required the codification of the laws, for so long kept secret within the patrician priestly colleges, leaving plebeians perpetually vulnerable to arbitrary legal judgment. The demand for written law led to the appointment of the decemvirs, 10 men charged with the task of compiling a formal legal code, resulting in the publication of the Law of the 12 Tables, inscribed upon bronze tablets and publicly displayed in the forum for all citizens to read and understand. Though primitive, these 12 tables established the fundamental principle that the law applied equally to all Roman citizens, setting the foundation for the vast legal philosophy that Rome would eventually impose upon the entirety of the Mediterranean world. Yet social equality was a prize won not quickly, but through persistent struggle, waged across generations in the halls of debate and political maneuvering. For the wealthy and the well-born resisted the erosion of their traditional authority with cunning and obstinance. The patricians held fast to their exclusive right to perform the great religious rites and sought violently to prevent the dilution of their bloodlines, denying the fundamental right of intermarriage, or connubium, to the plebeians, a prohibition which poisoned the social peace and denied true unification among those who bled for the state. Nevertheless, the people pressed their claims fiercely, achieving, through the law of Cannuleius, the right for Romans of all orders to marry one another, thus weaving the social fabric of the state more tightly and allowing the rise of powerful plebeian families who now sought entry into the very highest offices of the Republic. This continued pressure on the established order resulted in the occasional substitution of consuls with military tribunes possessing consular power, a temporary compromise designed to appease the masses without fully surrendering the consular fasces to the non-patrician class. While Rome wrestled with these necessary internal adjustments, striving to secure the framework of its constitution, her gaze turned ever outward, seeking to secure her borders and dominance against the formidable Etruscan League across the Tiber River. The great city of Veii, rich, powerful, and an ancient rival to Rome's burgeoning authority, stood as the chief obstacle to Roman expansion into the fertile northern lands, necessitating a monumental campaign of relentless warfare to eliminate this strategic threat. For a period spanning 10 long years, mirroring the legendary siege of Troy in its length and strain upon the national spirit, the Roman legions pressed against the fortified walls of Veii, straining the Republic's resources and demanding sacrifices of its citizen soldiers unlike any campaign preceding it, marking the first sustained period of professionalized, salaried warfare in Roman history. This decade of continuous conflict necessitated the introduction of state pay for soldiers, transforming military service from an occasional civic duty into a sustained vocation, permanently altering the relationship between the citizen and the state and establishing the economic backbone of Roman expansion. The long stalemate before the walls of Veii was finally broken not by brute force alone, but by cunning and the inspired leadership of Marcus Furius Camillus, a stern and highly disciplined figure appointed dictator for the specific purpose of achieving immediate victory where years of attrition had failed. Camillus, observing the impregnable nature of the great city's defenses, commanded the construction of deep subterranean tunnels, skillfully burrowing beneath the massive walls and emerging silently within the very citadel of Veii, right near the temple dedicated to Juno, the city's patron goddess. Through this secret, audacious passage, Roman troops burst forth in a tide, seizing the stronghold by surprise and putting an end to the siege, thus delivering immense spoils and adding vast territory to the Roman domain, solidifying Rome's mastery over southern Etruria. Yet the triumph of Camillus was quickly followed by jealousy and political dispute, for his proud bearing and immense wealth garnered from the spoils invited the enmity of the tribunes, who accused him of arrogance and misappropriation of sacred property, eventually leading to his proud, self-imposed exile from the city he had so recently saved. The victorious Gauls poured into the city, finding it largely deserted, for the shock of the defeat had prompted the panicked flight of almost the entire populace to the relative safety of Veii and other allied towns, carrying what few possessions and gods they could salvage. Only a small, resolute garrison, composed primarily of the city's revered elders and remaining soldiers who had vowed to die in defense of the Republic's honor, withdrew to the steep, seemingly impregnable height of the Capitoline Hill, the religious heart of the state, determined to hold this final bastion until relief could somehow arrive. Brennus and his warriors looted the city with casual violence, burning the wooden structures and scattering the records and archives of the preceding centuries, inflicting a physical and cultural wound upon Rome that required generations of painful reconstruction to heal and rebuild. For many months thereafter, the Gauls besieged the Capitoline citadel, attempting to starve the desperate defenders into submission, a siege made famous by the legendary intervention of the sacred geese of the Temple of Juno, whose honking alarm calls woke the sleeping guards just in time to repel a surprise nocturnal assault upon the sheer walls. Eventually, driven by starvation within the citadel and the growing weariness of the besiegers, negotiations commenced, resulting in the humiliating agreement to ransom the city's remaining defenders with a vast weight of gold, paid out from the remaining public treasury. As the gold was being weighed out upon the scales, Brennus famously scorned the Roman protests of unequal measures by violently casting his heavy iron sword onto the pan, uttering the terrible and unforgettable words, "Vae victis," woe to the conquered, a phrase that burned into the Roman psyche the eternal lesson that military victory and strength were the only guarantors of justice and sovereignty. It was only then, tradition holds, that the exiled Camillus, having hastily gathered a relief force from the remnants scattered at Veii, arrived at the very moment of greatest humiliation, declaring that Rome must be redeemed not by ignoble gold, but by the strength of iron and the sharpness of the sword. Though the details are shrouded by the pain of memory, Camillus is said to have driven the Gauls back in a decisive though chaotic skirmish outside the ruins of the city, thus earning himself the eternal title of second founder of Rome for restoring the state after its near annihilation. The trauma of the Gallic sack, the infamous Dies Aliensis, served as a brutal, clarifying moment for the young republic, tearing down the physical structures of the city and forcing its citizens to recognize the absolute necessity of robust internal stability for external survival. The infrastructure was ruined, the historical records destroyed, and the disparity between the patrician wealth and the common plebeian debt became intolerably sharp during the difficult and expensive process of reconstruction. It became profoundly clear to the mass of the population that true strength against formidable foreign enemies could only be built upon a foundation of deep social equity and political integration, prompting the plebeians to renew their struggle for full political parity with unprecedented vigor. This critical moment, born from ashes and humiliation, set the stage for the most sweeping constitutional overhaul yet seen in the Republic's history, as the common people demanded ironclad legislative protection against exorbitant debt, the guaranteed subdivision of conquered public lands, and, crucially, open access to the highest office in the land, the prestigious and powerful consulship, which they felt they had earned through their blood and sacrifice. Greetings, dear listeners. From where do you join us this evening? We continue our measured contemplation of Rome's relentless ascent. The decades immediately following the trauma of the Gallic sack saw the relentless pressure of the common people finally break the ancient and rigid patrician resistance, forcing a profound re-evaluation of who held the right to govern the state they had all bled to defend. The plebeian tribunes Gaius Ricinius Stolo and Lucius Sextius Lateranus championed sweeping legislation that would fundamentally restructure the organs of state, demanding that the supreme military and civil office of the consulship be opened to the homo novus, the new man, allowing commoners to vie for the highest honors of the Republic. This pivotal struggle culminated in the passage of the Licinian Sextian Rogations in 367 BCE, securing not only the right of plebeians to reach the apex of military and political command, but also offering vital relief concerning exorbitant usury and securing the fairer distribution of conquered public territory. This constitutional victory marked the true beginning of the mature Roman Republic, establishing a robust framework where genuine internal class conflict could be channeled into productive legislative debate rather than outright civil strife, thus cementing the power that stemmed from unified internal strength. With the internal political machinery now stabilized and the common man invested in the survival and prosperity of the state, Rome turned its unified gaze outward, recognizing that enduring security was found not merely in defensive walls, but in proactive dominance over the fragmented and competitive Italian peninsula. The immediate next test of Roman tenacity lay not with the ephemeral fury of the Gallic chieftains, who were prone to quick raids, but with the stalwart, mountainous peoples dwelling in the rugged central Apennines, the Samnites, whose martial discipline and tenacity rivaled that of the disciplined Roman legionaries. These hardy clans held sway over vital strategic passes and fertile lowland territories essential for Rome's burgeoning agrarian economy and strategic defense, making inevitable a protracted and existential clash between the ambitious city-state and the fiercely independent Samnite Federation. The initial skirmishes quickly escalated into a prolonged, century-defining struggle known to history as the Samnite Wars, a series of bitter and complex conflicts that would either break the Republic forever or temper it into the absolute and unchallenged master of all Italy. The First Samnite War, though brief, demonstrated Rome's capacity for rapid mobilization and strategic alliance, stemming initially from a defensive appeal made by the rich Campanian city of Capua against encroaching Samnite aggression. Rome intervened successfully, pushing the mountain men back from the fertile plains, yet the victory served primarily to heighten tensions with her close neighbors and foundational allies in the Latin League, who viewed Rome's rapidly growing dominance and unilateral actions with mounting apprehension and deep suspicion. The subsequent and swift dissolution of the Latin League and Rome's masterful political absorption of their territories into the Roman sphere of influence proved conclusively that Rome was no longer merely a humble partner, but a sovereign power dictating the terms of engagement across the entirety of Latium and Campania. This masterful assimilation secured Rome's immediate southern flank, ensuring that the next, far more brutal phase of conflict with the persistent Samnites would be fought by a substantially larger, more unified, and geographically consolidated body politic. The Second Samnite War became the terrible crucible where Roman resolve was truly forged, a grinding contest of attrition fought across unforgiving mountainous terrain far from the comforts and familiar defense of the Roman plain. Early in this devastating conflict, the Republic suffered one of its most profoundly humiliating military disasters at the narrow pass of the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE, where an entire consular army was trapped and forced to surrender under ignominious conditions, compelled to pass beneath the yoke as a universal symbol of utter and shameful defeat. The public disgrace of the Caudine Forks did not, however, lead to collapse, as the Samnites might have hoped, but rather inspired a profound institutional and military reform, prompting the Romans to abandon the heavy, static Greek phalanx formation entirely in favor of the flexible, maneuverable maniple system. This military revolution, born directly from defeat and despair, provided the tactical advantage Rome desperately needed, allowing them slowly, meticulously, and relentlessly to turn the tide against their resourceful and resilient highland adversaries in a long war of methodical conquest and fortress building. The hard-won victories secured during the latter half of the Second Samnite conflict established a sophisticated network of Roman colonies and fortifications deep within Samnite territory, acting as iron anchors designed to hold the conquered lands in perpetuity and to divide the enemy. This relentless strategic pressure pushed the Samnites to seek a grand, desperate coalition against the burgeoning power of Rome, culminating in the Third Samnite War, where they successfully allied themselves with their former enemies, the proud Etruscans, the Umbrians, and even managed to call forth a fresh wave of Gallic warriors descending from the Po Valley in the north. The decisive confrontation of this entire sequence of struggles occurred at Sentinum in 295 BCE, a colossal battle where the unified Roman and allied armies faced the assembled might of this vast four-nation coalition, recognizing that the fate of the entire peninsula hinged entirely upon the outcome of that single day's carnage. The triumphant legions of Rome crushed the coalition utterly, eliminating the last serious indigenous threat to Roman supremacy in central Italy and irrevocably securing the central spine of the entire peninsula under their direct control. The triumphant legions of Rome crushed the coalition utterly, eliminating the last serious indigenous threat to Roman supremacy in central Italy and irrevocably securing the central spine of the entire peninsula under their direct control. Having survived the tactical brilliance and exotic warfare of Pyrrhus, and demonstrating its absolute resilience on the most challenging battlefields, Rome finally drove the weary king from Italy, inheriting the valuable Greek territories and achieving complete, undisputed mastery over the entirety of the Italian peninsula, stretching from the northern Apennine passes down to the toe of the boot. The long process of assimilation was sophisticated and subtle, binding the various conquered peoples to Rome not merely through punitive subjugation, but through a graded system of partial citizenship, binding alliances, and mandatory military service obligations, creating an unprecedented and vast reservoir of political and martial loyalty. This process established the Italian Confederation, a political and military entity unlike any seen before, possessing a profound depth of unified resources, ready to be deployed against any future challenge that might arise from beyond the seas. The city-state on the river Tiber, once so nearly wiped from the map by the ephemeral fury of the Gauls, had now become the greatest centralized power west of the Adriatic, and its ambitious gaze, emboldened by a century of continuous victorious struggle, began inexorably to turn towards the rich, tempting island of Sicily, setting the stage for an inevitable and epic-defining confrontation with the other great maritime power of the Western Mediterranean, the formidable Phoenician city-state of Carthage. This collision, looming large on the horizon, promised to be the greatest and most desperate test of Rome's survival yet conceived.